There are rules when the devil kicks in your door. You don't look him in the eye. You don't ask for mercy. But when you're holding 20 pounds of sleeping infant against a chest that hasn't taken a full breath in a year, you break every single rule. The radiator in apartment 4B hissed, spitting a pathetic stream of lukewarm water onto the warped linoleum. Nora didn't have the energy to wipe it up. She stood at the cramped kitchen counter, the cheap cotton of her oversized t-shirt clinging to the sweat on her back. She was a big woman, broad-hipped and heavy, carrying the lingering, soft weight of a pregnancy that had ended 8 months ago, layered over a body that had never been small to begin with. Her thighs rubbed together as she shifted her weight from one aching foot to the other, methodically scrubbing the dried crust of formula from a plastic bottle. The apartment smelled like stale milk, boiled cabbage, and exhaustion. It was all she had left. Tommy had been gone for 3 weeks. He hadn't packed a bag. He hadn't kissed her goodbye. He had just walked out to buy a pack of cigarettes and vanished into the damp Chicago night, leaving behind an empty bank account, a pile of final notice utility bills, and their son, Leo. Leo was asleep in the battered playpen squeezed between the sofa and the television stand. He was the only good thing Tommy had ever given her. Nora rinsed the bottle, setting it on the drying rack. She reached up to wipe her damp forehead with the back of her hand. Then the front door exploded. There was no polite knock, no warning jiggle of the handle, just the deafening crack of splintering wood and sheared metal. The door flew inward, slamming against the drywall with enough force to crack the plaster. Nora didn't scream. Her breath simply seized in her throat. Her maternal instinct, primal and absolute, overrode her shock. She dropped the scrub brush and threw her heavy body across the 3 feet of space, separating the kitchen from the living room, diving between the intruders and the playpen. 3 men filled her tiny living room. They were large, broad-shouldered, and moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency. They didn't shout. They didn't brandish their weapons wildly. 2 of them fanned out, checking the narrow hallway and the single bedroom. The 3rd man stepped over the ruined door. He was different. He didn't look like a thug. He wore a dark, immaculately tailored wool overcoat that hung perfectly from his shoulders. His dark hair was neatly parted, silvering slightly at the temples. His face was a hard, aristocratic mask of sharp angles and shadow. He looked entirely out of place in her crumbling, roach-infested apartment, like a razor blade resting on a dirty sponge. Gabriel Moretti. Nora knew the name. Tommy had muttered it in his sleep. He had cursed it over cheap beer. He had ultimately run from it. Gabriel stood in the center of the room. He didn't look at the peeling wallpaper or the stained carpet. He looked directly at Nora. His eyes were the color of wet slate and entirely devoid of empathy. "Clear," one of the men in the hallway said, his voice low. "Where is Thomas?" Gabriel asked. His voice was a quiet rumble, barely carrying over the hiss of the radiator. Yet it commanded the entire room. Nora pressed her back against the playpen. The plastic mesh dug into her spine. She could feel Leo stirring behind her, letting out a soft, confused whimper. She wrapped her thick arms around her own waist, trying to stop the violent trembling that had seized her entire body. "He's not here," Nora choked out. Her voice sounded thin, pathetic. "He left 3 weeks ago." Gabriel didn't blink. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. Nora flinched, bracing for the crack of a gunshot. Instead, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and dropped it onto the coffee table. "Thomas owes me $200,000, Gabriel stated, stepping closer. The smell of him, cold outside air, expensive leather, and something metallic, washed over her. "He stole product from my docks. He sold it to my competitors. He is a liability." "I don't know where he is," Nora pleaded, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her flushed cheeks. I swear to God. He left us. He took all the money. I don't have anything." Gabriel looked at her. Really looked at her. He took in her faded, stretched sweat pants, the worn-out slippers on her feet, the panicked heave of her large chest. His gaze was clinical, dissecting her worth and finding it lacking. "Debts do not vanish just because the debtor is a coward," Gabriel said softly. Behind her, Leo started to cry. A thin, reedy wail that cut through the heavy tension in the room. One of the thugs stepped forward, drawing a heavy, black handgun from his waistband. He pointed it down at the floor, but the threat was unmistakable. "Want me to shut the kid up, boss?" The bottom fell out of Nora's world. The cynicism, the exhaustion, the bitter resignation of her life, all of it burned away in a white-hot flash of absolute terror. She didn't think, she just moved. Nora threw her heavy body forward, dropping hard onto her knees on the stained carpet. The impact rattled her bones, but she didn't care. She reached out, her thick fingers desperately catching the expensive wool of Gabriel's trousers. "Please," she sobbed, her voice tearing from her throat, raw and ugly. She looked up at him, her face wet, her double chin trembling, completely abandoning any shred of dignity. "Take me. Kill me. Do whatever you want to me. But please, please don't hurt my baby. Please." She squeezed her eyes shut, bowing her head, waiting for the bullet, waiting for the end. The gunshot didn't come. Instead, the suffocating silence in the room stretched, broken only by Nora's ragged, wet breathing and the escalating cries of her son. The carpet under her knees was damp. The smell of dirt and old beer wafted up from the fibers. She kept her grip on Gabriel's pants, her knuckles white, her body braced for the blunt force trauma of a boot to her face. "Put the gun away, Dante," a voice said. It was Gabriel. The quiet authority in his tone brooked no argument. Nora heard the soft scrape of a holster, but she didn't open her eyes. She couldn't. She was completely undone, a heavy, sobbing mess on the floor, waiting for the axe to fall. Then she felt movement. The fabric of the trousers shifted beneath her tight grip. Gabriel was moving. Nora gasped and flinched backward, releasing him, expecting him to strike her. He didn't. With a slow, deliberate grace that defied his size, the Mafia boss lowered himself. The knees of his custom-tailored suit hit the filthy carpet. He didn't squat. He didn't lean over her. Gabriel Moretti knelt completely, lowering his center of gravity until his slate-gray eyes were perfectly level with Nora's tear-streaked face. The two thugs by the door shifted uncomfortably, exchanging confused glances, but Gabriel ignored them. He stayed there on his knees, a predator placing himself on the same plane as his prey. He was close enough now that Nora could see the faint, white scar cutting through his left eyebrow. He looked at her panicked, red-rimmed eyes, the sweat matting her dull brown hair, the soft, trembling curve of her jaw. "Stop crying," he said. It wasn't a threat, it was an instruction, flat and even. Nora swallowed a sob, hiccuping loudly. She brought a shaking hand to her mouth, biting her own flesh to stifle the noise. Gabriel held her gaze for a long moment. He didn't look at her with disgust, which was what she was used to from men like Tommy. He looked at her with a cold, calculating curiosity. Slowly, deliberately, Gabriel shifted his attention away from her and looked over her shoulder toward the playpen. Leo was standing now, gripping the mesh, his face red, tears streaming down his chubby cheeks, wailing for his mother. Gabriel watched the child. The muscles in his jaw ticked. "Thomas didn't just steal from me," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a low register meant only for Nora. "He stole from the Albanians before he came to my territory. He was playing three sides." Nora stared at him, confused, her breath catching. I don't— Do you understand what that means, Nora? Gabriel asked. He knew her name. The realization sent a fresh spike of ice through her veins. She shook her head violently. It means I am not the only one looking for him, Gabriel explained, his eyes cutting back to hers. And the men who will come through that broken door next do not operate by my rules. They do not care if a child is crying. They will burn this building to the ash just to send Thomas a message. Nora's stomach plummeted. She looked back at the ruined door, the jagged splinters of wood hanging off the hinges. She was entirely exposed. The illusion of safety her pathetic apartment provided was permanently shattered. He left us here as bait, Nora whispered, the horrific realization settling heavy in her chest. Tommy knew they would come. He had used his own son and his overweight, exhausted girlfriend as a roadblock to buy himself time. Yes, Gabriel confirmed without an ounce of pity. Nora slumped, the fight draining out of her. Her broad shoulders rounded, and she looked down at her hands, resting heavily on her thick thighs. She was 28 years old, carrying an extra 60 pounds, with $12 to her name, and her son was a target for a cartel. So do it, Nora said, her voice turning dead, flat, the cynicism finally overriding the panic. She looked back up at the man kneeling in front of her. If they're going to kill us anyway, just do it. Get it over with. But shoot me first. Don't make me watch. Gabriel's eyes narrowed slightly, a microscopic shift in his cold facade. He studied the heavy, defeated woman in front of him. She wasn't beautiful. She wasn't thin. She wasn't useful. But she had thrown herself in front of a gun without hesitation. She possessed a fierce, unpolished loyalty that his own men often lacked. Gabriel stood up. He brushed a speck of dust from the knee of his trousers. "Get up," he ordered. Nora didn't move. "What?" "Get up," Gabriel repeated, turning his back on her to look at his men. "Dante, clear out the baby's things. Formula, diapers, clothes, whatever fits in a bag." "Boss?" Dante asked, clearly thrown. "Do it," Gabriel snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. He turned back to Nora, who was staring up at him in utter bewilderment. "You have 5 minutes to pack a bag for yourself," Gabriel told her, pulling a sleek phone from his pocket. "Essentials only. We are leaving." Nora pushed herself up, her knees popping, heavily relying on the arm of the sofa. "Leaving? Going where?" "Thomas's debt is unpaid, which means his assets belong to me until it is," Gabriel said, his tone entirely businesslike, devoid of any warmth. He dialed a number, holding the phone to his ear. "You and the child are coming with me. If you stay here, you will be dead by morning. The choice is yours." He didn't wait for her answer. He began barking orders in rapid Italian into his phone, walking towards the hallway. Nora stood frozen in the center of the living room, her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Dante, who was awkwardly throwing a sleeve of diapers and cans of powdered formula into a black duffel bag. She looked at Leo, who had stopped crying and was now watching the strangers in his home with wide, curious eyes. She was a heavy, discarded woman, a casualty of a low-level hustler's bad bet, and the most dangerous man in Chicago had just ordered her to pack a bag. Nora didn't have a choice. She grabbed a laundry basket and started throwing clothes into it. The devil had kicked in her door, but for some terrifying reason, he was offering her a ride out of hell. The estate was a fortress disguised as modern architecture, sitting on a sprawling acreage in the northern suburbs. For the first 4 days, Nora felt like a boulder dropped into a glass house. Everything was sleek, silent, and obscenely expensive. The floors were radiant heated, polished concrete. The windows were floor to ceiling, thick, bulletproof glass overlooking a gray, churning Lake Michigan. There was no peeling wallpaper here, no hissing radiators. Just the low, mechanical hum of central air, and the muted footsteps of men who carried concealed weapons under designer suits. Nora had been given a guest suite on the second floor. It was larger than her entire apartment. Dante had dropped 3 shopping bags on the king-sized bed on their second morning. They weren't filled with the cliché silk lingerie or tight dresses of a mobster's fantasy. They held thick, high-quality leggings, oversized cashmere sweaters, and nursing bras in her exact, difficult-to-find size. Gabriel hadn't tried to dress her up. He had simply observed her reality and ordered his men to accommodate it. She wore a charcoal grey sweater that draped heavily over her wide hips and stood by the window, bouncing a sleeping Leo against her chest. She was a prisoner, a highly accommodated, well-fed prisoner, but a prisoner nonetheless. Gabriel Moretti was a ghost in his own home. He worked behind the heavy oak double doors of his study at the end of the hall. When she did see him, usually in passing, flanked by his lieutenants, he didn't linger. He gave her a singular, sweeping nod, his slate-grey eyes checking on his assets before moving on. He didn't make passes. He didn't offer fake, comforting smiles. It was maddening. The silence of the house gave Nora too much time to think. She missed the exhaustion of her old life. Exhaustion was a blanket that smothered panic. Here, with Leo's crib full of fresh blankets, the fridge stocked with organic purees, and a hired pediatrician coming just to check his mild cough, Nora was forced to sit with her terror. When would the Albanians come? When would Gabriel decide the debt was impossible to collect and cut his losses? When would he look at her heavy, stretch-marked body and decide she was taking up too much space? On the 7th night, the silence finally broke her. It was 2 a.m. Leo was asleep. Nora's back ached, a dull throb near her lumbar spine from carrying his weight all day. She walked downstairs in her bare feet, her thick thighs brushing together in the quiet hallway. She needed water. She needed to move. The kitchen was dark, save for the blue glow of the massive commercial refrigerator. Nora opened it, the cool air washing over her face. "You don't sleep." Nora jumped, her hand slamming against the stainless steel door. Gabriel was sitting at the massive granite island in the dark. A single crystal glass containing an inch of amber liquid rested in front of him. He was out of his suit coat, the sleeves of his crisp white shirt rolled up to the elbows, exposing thick, corded forearms dusted with dark hair. In the shadows, he looked less like a businessman and more like the violent predator Tommy had warned her about. "Mothers don't sleep," Nora said, her voice rough. She didn't cower. The initial blinding terror from the apartment had morphed into a cynical, hardened, defensive shell. Hostages definitely don't. Gabriel took a slow sip of his drink. He didn't dispute the title. "The boy has a cough. Did the doctor provide the right medication?" "Yes," Nora said. She grabbed a bottle of water and shut the fridge. The heavy thud echoed in the massive room. She stood her ground, gripping the plastic bottle. "Why are we here, Gabriel?" "Really?" He didn't answer immediately. He traced the rim of his glass. "I told you. Thomas left a mess. You are collateral." "Bullshit," Nora snapped. The word hung in the air, dangerous and sharp. Dante would have shot someone for raising their voice to the Don, but Gabriel merely tilted his head, intrigued. "Tommy owes you 200 grand. You've spent 10,000 on clothes and doctors in a week. I'm fat, I'm broke, and I'm a high school dropout. I am not leverage." "Tommy didn't care about us when he was here. He certainly doesn't care now that he's running. So why?" Gabriel stood up. He moved with that terrifying, quiet grace. He walked around the island, stepping into the shaft of moonlight pouring through the skylight. He stopped 3 feet from her. He was taller than her by nearly a foot, broad-shouldered and imposing, yet Nora refused to step back. She planted her bare feet firmly on the tile, holding her heavy frame rigid. "Because you did not flinch," Gabriel said softly. Nora frowned. "What?" "When the door broke, you did not scream. You did not run for the fire escape," Gabriel said, his slate eyes mapping her face. "You threw yourself over the crib. You begged for his life, not yours." He reached out. Nora stiffened, but she didn't retreat. His large, calloused hand gently grazed the side of her arm, his thumb brushing the thick wool of her sweater. It wasn't a sexual touch. It was an assessment, an acknowledgement of something solid. "I live in a world of cowards, Nora," Gabriel murmured, his voice dropping to a gravelly rumble. "Men who would sell their own mothers for a shipment of guns. Women who smile to my face and calculate my net worth in their heads. And then there is you." He stepped back, the warmth of his proximity vanishing, leaving her shivering. "You are exactly what you appear to be," he finished, turning back toward his glass. "That is a rare commodity in my house. Try to sleep." He left her standing in the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs, realizing with a cold shock that Gabriel Moretti wasn't keeping her as a prisoner. He was keeping her as an anchor. 3 nights later, the Albanians finally found them. It wasn't a subtle break-in. It was a coordinated assault. Nora woke to the deafening wail of the perimeter alarms, followed immediately by the staccato crack of automatic gunfire rattling the bulletproof windows. She rolled out of bed, her heavy body hitting the floor hard. Adrenaline, sharp and metallic, flooded her veins. She crawled across the carpet to the crib, hauling Leo out. The baby woke instantly, letting out a terrified shriek. "Shh, shh, Mama's got you. I've got you," she chanted, pressing his face into her large, soft chest, muffling his cries. The bedroom door slammed open. Nora scrambled backward against the wall, bracing to be shot. It was Gabriel. He held a sleek, black assault rifle in one hand. Blood was smeared across his cheekbone from a shallow cut, bright red against his pale skin. He didn't look aristocratic anymore. He looked like war. "Move!" he barked, crossing the room in 3 strides. He grabbed Nora by the bicep. His grip was bruising, absolute. He hauled her to her feet, ignoring the heavy, dead weight of her panic. He shoved her toward the walk-in closet, hitting a hidden panel behind a mirror. The wall slid back, revealing a dark, concrete-lined panic room. "Get in. Do not make a sound," Gabriel ordered. "What about you?" Nora asked, the words tearing from her throat before she could stop them. Gabriel paused. He looked down at her. His chest was heaving. He reached out, his bloody hand gripping the back of her neck, pulling her forward. He didn't kiss her. He rested his forehead against hers for one fraction of a second. A grounding touch in the middle of chaos. "Keep him quiet," Gabriel said. Then he shoved her inside, and the heavy steel door slid shut, plunging Nora into absolute darkness. The silence in the panic room was worse than the gunfire. Nora sat on the cold floor in the pitch black, her thick legs wrapped around Leo, rocking him until her arms went numb. She lost track of time. Hours bled together. She smelled dust, her own sour sweat, and the fading scent of Gabriel's expensive cologne lingering on her skin where he had touched her neck. Finally, the mechanical hum of the steel door engaged. Light spilled into the small space, blinding her. Gabriel stood in the doorway. His white shirt was ruined, stained with dirt and darker, rust-colored patches. His breathing was heavy, but his eyes were clear. "It's over," he said. Nora didn't ask who won. She let Gabriel help her up, her knees popping loudly in the quiet room. She carried Leo out into the bedroom. The house smelled like cordite and bleach. Gabriel sat heavily on the edge of her mattress. He rested his elbows on his knees, dropping his head into his hands. The ruthless Mafia Don suddenly looked like a deeply exhausted mortal man. Nora walked into the adjoining bathroom, her broad hips swaying, and grabbed a damp washcloth from the sink. She walked back and stood in front of him. Gabriel looked up. Nora didn't ask for permission. She reached down, her soft, fleshy fingers gently pressing the damp cloth to the cut on his cheekbone, wiping away the dried blood. He flinched slightly, then leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "Thomas is dead," Gabriel said quietly, his voice vibrating through the space between them. Nora's hand stopped. She looked at him. She didn't feel a swell of grief. She felt a sickening, heavy drop in her stomach, followed by a rush of bitter, inevitable reality. Tommy was always going to end up in a ditch. "The Albanians?" she asked, her voice flat. "Yes, they found him in a motel in Gary 2 days ago. They thought he had the money here." "They were wrong," Gabriel said. He opened his eyes, looking up at her face. "The debt is settled. His life covered the principal." Gabriel reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick, white envelope. He held it out to her. "There is $50,000 in there. Untraceable cash," Gabriel said. The clinical, detached tone was back in his voice. The mask had slipped back on. "Dante has a car waiting out front. He will take you anywhere in the country. You are free." Nora looked at the envelope. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It was a lifeline, a fresh start. She looked from the envelope to the man sitting on her bed. She saw the tension in his shoulders. She saw the way his eyes tracked the steady rise and fall of her heavy chest, the way he looked at the soft curve of her stomach. Not with disgust, but with a strange, hungry reverence. The world outside this fortress was the same world that had chewed her up and spit her out. Out there, she was just a fat, broke, uneducated single mother. Out there, men like Tommy lied and stole. Here the monsters were honest. Nora slowly reached out and took the envelope. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He looked away, staring at the wall, resigning himself to her departure. Nora turned around and walked over to the dresser. She dropped the envelope onto the polished wood. The soft thud echoed in the room. Gabriel's head snapped back to her. "What are you doing?" "I don't want it," Nora said. She turned back to face him, crossing her arms under her breasts. She planted her feet. She was not a small, delicate flower to be swept away. She was a mountain, rooting herself into the earth. "Where am I supposed to go, Gabriel? The world is a meat grinder." Gabriel stood up, closing the distance between them until he was staring down at her. "You cannot stay here. This is a violent life. You saw tonight." "I lived in a violent life before I met you," Nora fired back, her voice rising, fierce and unyielding. "I just lived in the cheap seats. I know exactly what this is. But I also know that when the bullets started flying, my ex-boyfriend ran, and the Mafia Don put me behind a steel door." Gabriel stared at her, his chest rising and falling heavily. "Nora." "Look at me, Gabriel," Nora demanded, gesturing to her own heavy body. "Really look at me. I am not a mob wife. I will never fit into the silk dresses. I take up space. I have stretch marks. I carry a child that isn't yours. I am loud, I am cynical, and I am not going to pretend to be a submissive little pet." Gabriel's slate eyes darkened. The coldness shattered, replaced by a burning, intense heat. "I have a house full of empty rooms and men who lie to my face every single day," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a low, desperate gravel. "I don't want a pet. I want the only real thing that has ever walked through my door." He didn't hesitate this time. Gabriel stepped forward, closing the final inch between them. He wrapped his large arms around her thick waist, pulling her heavy, soft body flush against his hard angles. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her sweat, the baby formula, and the sheer, unadulterated reality of her. He dropped to his knees, right there on the plush carpet, burying his face against her soft stomach, wrapping his arms securely around her wide hips. It wasn't an act of mercy this time. It was an act of surrender. Nora looked down at the most dangerous man in Chicago kneeling at her feet. She slowly reached down, her fingers tangling in his dark, silvering hair. She had traded one cage for another, but for the first time in her life, she held the keys. The world is full of broken rules and unexpected survivors. Did Nora make the right choice, staying in the lion's den? Or is she trading one cage for another? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you loved this grounded, gritty romance, hit that like button, share this story with a friend who appreciates real characters, and subscribe to our channel for more audio dramas that don't shy away from the truth. See you next time.